All right, welcome back to another episode with the ladies of Soul Solutions. This episode is called Healing in Real Time, where we're going to discuss some trauma and understand trauma together. I want to give some focus on our founder, which is Jamal Ward for Soul Solutions. He was very intentional about putting the philosophy in the name. So, soul is representing yourself, meaning that you are a unique individual, and solutions, you have the solution within yourself. So, we as counselors are here to just kind of help you discover what some of those inner strengths are and help you be the best versions of yourself. Before we get started, I do want to give you guys a brief introduction. My name is Tanesha Rivers. I am a licensed clinical mental health counselor, also a licensed clinical addiction specialist. I do work with kids or teenagers, adults, couples about adjustment issues, anxiety, depression, and also trauma-related issues. Cherish.
Yes. Hi, I'm Cherish Fields. I'm the Chief Operations Officer actually for Soul Solutions, and I am a licensed clinical social work associate as well as a licensed clinical addiction specialist associate as well.
hmm Hey, I'm Parker Tompkins. I am one of the therapists of Soul Solutions. I am a licensed clinical social worker associate and also a licensed clinical addiction specialist associate as well. Areas of focus for me, similar to Tanisha, working with adolescents, adults, families on anxiety and depression and trauma related issues for sure.
Hello, I am Naaila Moumaris. I am the newest member here today with Soul Solutions. I am a licensed clinical mental health counselor associate. I am also trained in EMDR. I've been in the field for a very long time, so I'm known for a couple of things. I'm known for working with couples. I'm known for working with women. What I love is working with women and working with teenagers, anyone who is going through some type of transition in their life. That could be post divorce, that could be trauma recovery, but moving from one phase to the other. And that's me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Nyla, and welcome to the team.
Well, thank you.
Happy to
You're
have
very
you.
welcome.
Yes.
Tell us what brought you to Soul Solutions.
One of the things that I like the most, and I think all of us have been in the industry long enough where we know that it happens where you go to an agency and they tell you what it is that they are looking for based upon their referrals, based upon who's calling right then at the most popular time. And I understand it. It's a business. They have to fit a need. But Jamal wanted to know, what are you good at?
Mm-hmm.
And I want you to come here and be good at what you're good at.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, okay, I can do that.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Absolutely. Are there any things that stand out to you so far since being here?
People are warm. And we think that, helpers and healers, that's automatic. It's not.
Mm-hmm.
All of you know, everyone is warm.
Yeah.
So I appreciate and receive the warmth.
Yeah. I also want to note the challenge that Jamal pushes us to do, like to get out of our comfort zone,
Mm-hmm.
try something new. If we see it in ourselves, he kind of pushes us to say, hey, like you can do it. If you see it, you can do it. So I also appreciate that too.
Okay, so now that you say that, I'm already thinking I better really be good at whatever it is that I said I was good at. I better be good. Yeah.
No, that's so
Yep.
real. And Tanisha, you saying that made me think just about Jamal and how he pushes us to our just outside of our comfort zone. I called Jamal like 2 weeks ago with a question. And by the time the call was over, I answered the question, but Jamal made me answer the question. And he just does have a way of empowering and making you feel like the solution is there, and we just gotta figure it out for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Hence the name Soul Solutions, right?
Mhm.
He even has us pull out our own solutions with us. So
Yeah.
For sure.
that's something I really appreciate about him. All right, so let's get in on trauma. First question is, how do you define trauma as it pertains to mental health?
Mm.
It's so broad and can look like so many things. That's why that question is a little tricky. But to me, if there is an experience that you go through big, small, medium, however, and it causes distress, and it's not something that goes away when the experience is done. It can be trauma. It can be traumatic,
Right.
in a whole spectrum of ways, for sure.
Right. I usually say it's an impairment that happens due to an event, a situation, or a moment in your life, but that impairment recurs. That stifling, that block, it recurs again. It's like stubbing your toe on the table. You know, you don't have to throw that table away. You know, that's not necessarily a traumatic moment. You may push it, you become a bit more cautious. But when it's traumatic, you know, now you want to torch the table.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I would say for me, I definitely see it as subjective because I've seen many clients categorize or label trauma differently. But I would say that it is what affects that individual the most and where they may find themselves stuck. So it's almost kind of like where they park and then they keep experiencing different symptoms like hypervigilance. It's when your safety has been disrupted.
Yeah.
So it's a disruption, I like to say.
Yeah.
It's constantly where you have to continuously almost try to find that safety again, try to find that balance again, but it's disrupted you.
For sure.
Absolutely. I like what you said when you said stuck. I think both of y'all did. It's like even your mental state, sometimes you can go back into still being mentally a victim of that situation. And it's hard for you to move on and push forward because it continues to go back. So it's something that you usually don't have the coping skills for, no matter how hard you try. It's something that if you continuously feel it and you continuously feel like you're still being attacked in some sort or some way, it can be considered as a trauma.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Are there any misconceptions that you guys have heard with clients about trauma?
Yes.
Misconceptions. I think the first thing, though, is that it's overused.
Yeah.
It's definitely overused because there are things, and I do believe social media has a lot to do with what it is I'm about to say, is that so we get into places where we draw out an emotion and a resolution is actually there.
Yeah.
You could actually, someone, if you needed a therapist, could facilitate or guide that transition to recovery. We'll call it that. Okay. To recovery. But there are people who just get stuck at emotion place and they don't move. But they could. But they don't choose to. And because they choose not to, oh, it must be traumatic. No, that's not trauma. That's you.
Like it becomes an excuse. Yeah. Like you're using the trauma as an excuse not to move forward.
Right, because recovery is hard.
Yeah.
Who wants to do that?
I like to say, related to trauma and anything, I think that's an awesome point. Things in life are hard. Experiencing trauma and being stuck and not searching for any resolution is hard. Additionally, doing the work and trying to, heal from some of that trauma to where the impact is not as strong is hard. So, I like to say to my clients, sometimes we got to choose our hard in this life. Sometimes it's not always going to be just this super quick option because, like you said, the healing journey is intentional. And especially when there's trauma involved, as you mentioned, there was a disruption. And a lot of times it's uncontrollable. We're having these recurring symptoms, recurring thoughts, memories, nightmares, whatever it may be. Or, avoidance of these situations that it's not even really a conscious thing. This is just our body and our brain's reaction to whatever we went through. And it does take a lot of intentionality to work towards being unstuck, for sure.
Absolutely.
For sure.
I would say misconceptions is that time will heal trauma. I've heard that. And one of the things that I always say is the trauma may have happened, but it's still your responsibility as an adult to heal it. Right. And so that for me was the misconception that sticks out the most.
Yeah. I think one that I just got recently, I had a client say, well, I can't stop crying. Do you have a pill for that? Is there like medication for that? And I'm like, okay, that can be answered in a couple of ways, but there is not a we can't just give you a pill and say, oh, your trauma is wiped away.
Mm-hmm.
This is a healing process. And the analogy that I like to use is like having a big wound. If you can imagine having a gash on your leg, at this point, the gash is infected, is bloody, is oozing, is nasty, it smells. And all you've been doing this whole time is putting a Band-Aid over it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And now that these things are coming up and you feel like you're ready to start healing, it's time to clean that wound out. It's time to compact it. It's time to go get some medications for it to help heal. And that takes time.
Yeah.
Even for your skin to come back normally, like it takes time. So you have to give yourself patience and grace in this thing. And I think that people are like, as soon as they come to therapy, they're just going to go in like 5 sessions and be done. And that's just not how it works.
Mm-hmm.
That's just not how it works.
Right. I thought you were what I thought you were going to say, and I like what you said, but I thought you were going to, because the belief is that if I'm still crying,
Yeah.
this therapy is not working.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't mean that you're going to stop
Yeah.
having an emotional effect to it, that you are not going to have a response.
Right.
I just don't want you to have a reaction.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's good.
Mm-hmm.
And it happens. And if you cry, guess what? You are okay.
You are.
I
And
love a cry.
human. And
Yes.
your emotions are working.
Mm-hmm.
And it's great to acknowledge and be in tune with your emotions.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good thing.
Yeah.
It is.
One other thing that was coming to mind too, just with misconceptions in general, is that you have to be directly hurt in order to, have trauma symptoms or have any residual impacts of something that occurred. People can witness horrible things happen to loved ones or to anyone and be traumatized. People can, be traumatized in a way that wasn't necessarily malicious or intentional, but it still had the impact. So people often think, trauma, you went to war or you were in a car accident or something very direct happened, and that's not always how it looks at all.
Right.
At all.
And that brings up the big T and the little T traumas.
Yeah.
When I first heard that, I was like, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. But like your big T traumas are the big major things that happen. It could be a physical attack, something that's big and happens to you. And then you have the little T traumas that people don't really pay attention to.
Mm-hmm.
Like this could be your bullying. This could be a parent that is overbearing, or honestly, sometimes a parent that doesn't do the most, that's not very supportive. Any other examples that you guys can think of for little T or big T traumas?
I believe the two that I can think of that I have seen is, and again, it ended up with the person having PTSD from divorce. Divorce can be a very traumatic situation. Another one that I have seen is not the death of a parent, which could do it too, but watching a parent
Oh,
pass
yes. Yeah.
through someone who is terminal and watching them slowly, literally pass away before your eyes.
Yeah. So I was going to answer your question, and now I actually would love to hear y'all's thoughts, because what's coming to mind for me is just kind of inconsistency and chaos and transitions that a lot of youth have to go through, like inconsistent caregivers. Maybe we're involved in foster care and have a bunch of different placements. I almost opened my mouth to say that was little T trauma, but that's pretty big.
Yeah. That's life. That
right.
draws your path for the
Right.
rest of your life. Yeah.
For sure.
It takes away your control. So when you think about trauma, the commonality is you have been left without control. Something was happened to you that you couldn't control. Something was taken from you outside your control. Those kind of things, it still relates back to kind of taking away your ability to control that, right? And that can disrupt someone's safety. And so anything with regard to that can be seen as a big, especially when it's repetitive.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So if it's a continuous thing, and then you have the piece of like complex trauma. So those are some of the things that I know I've seen. And when it comes to the big T traumas, those are the ones that you see and that are common. In the little T's, I think that's not though we talk about it, something I do think that it's not talked about enough is I've seen a lot of clients come in with work trauma. Microaggressions.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness.
A lot of microaggression.
Yeah.
And even to some extent manipulation.
Yeah.
Gaslighting,
Coercion.
yep, abandonment, neglect, lack of support,
Yes.
the ignoring, someone. So you see these different things, and I've seen them play out and be very traumatic for clients.
Absolutely.
I agree.
I feel like with the little T traumas as well, people are more likely to say, "Oh, that's nothing. Like you should be fine," and they don't realize the effects that it might have on somebody.
Yeah.
And they usually get pushed under the rug. I also feel like with parenting, sometimes those are also the things. It's like, oh well, my parent did me like that, and I'm fine.
Okay.
I'm all right. I made it. But are you?
Right? Are you?
Really, the answer to that is you survived.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you survived.
Mhm.
That is a really good thing. But are you your healthiest self?
Right.
Yes.
And those two are not the same.
They are not.
Because if you survived and that's it, one that kind of suggests that you're not your healthiest self and may need to look out, which is one of the symptoms of trauma, just existing in crisis or survival mode. That's dramatic.
Yeah.
And sometimes, unfortunately, especially with complex or chronic trauma, it becomes people's reality.
Life.
And they just don't even know. They're just sitting in daily crisis, daily trauma, because it's something that they have survived and then just kind of accepted as this is what it is. This is how I'm going to get through life. But it's not how it has to be.
Yep.
Not
Not okay.
So speaking of that, what are ways that trauma shows up in people that they may not even realize?
One of the first things that's coming to mind for me is around attachment. And I worked a lot with teenagers and young adults who have such a hard time forming healthy relationships with other people. And that, I mean, every single case that I have seen it in, it is a trauma response. And it's this inability to trust people that you inherently would think you're supposed to be able to trust.
Yeah.
And then an inability to, connect because you're so worried about, is this person going to be a safe person or not a safe person? So those just dynamics with attachments and boundaries and relationships, I think are one of the ways that it shows up very, very presently for a lot of people.
I think one of the most profound things I've heard is all behaviors mean something. When little kids are acting out, what is that behavior saying? When adults are acting out, what is that behavior saying? And sometimes we have to take a step back that even though we might be looking at an adult person, there's still a child in there that was probably went through something traumatic and they're acting out in that childlike way. So just paying attention to some of their behaviors, lashing out, being hypervigilant, running away. There's something going on there that needs to be looked at a little bit deeper.
For sure.
Yeah, I would agree. I think some of the things that I see too is irritation, right? Agitation, easily angered, a lot of emotions.
Yeah.
Maybe even on minor things. Just always, you can always, I wouldn't say always, not generalize it, but you will see some people where they scan the room. They're looking, or somebody close to them, or even just, you talked about attachments, being able to, someone being familiar smells, going around, can't go in that room, or just anything could be a trigger to a memory that would cause them to either isolate or externally act out.
Yes.
So it just, and sometimes it's even, because I've worked with adolescents who've experienced trauma and have been in foster care. And a lot of times, sometimes it's honestly going to school every day and seeing kids, their peers, go home with families, seeing things that they don't have. So it's a constant reminder for them. And that could be an adult as well, right? We hear things all the time where people really struggle. Sometimes having reminders of certain things where they experienced had different experiences that were traumatizing for them, and then they're reminded later on, and it keeps kind of coming up for them. So that's where that stuck and that disruption kind of happens, because they kind of stay there and they're finding their, I always say it's kind of like you're in this tunnel and you're trying to like get out, and you're constantly trying to dig yourself out, but it seems like the more you dig, the more falls.
Yeah.
Right.
And so it's like you, at some point, you're ready to give up unless somebody can come and help dig a big enough gap so you can actually see that there's light.
Even what you mentioning triggers, I think is such an integral part of trauma, because for a lot of people, you could get triggered and your body, your brain feels like you're right back in that trauma. And being able to help people differentiate between you are triggered and you are being reminded of this event versus this is happening to you all over again, because sometimes the bodily reaction is the same. Our brain doesn't always do the best separating a memory from what's happening. And so that's why it's so important, I think, being able to help our clients identify their triggers, what is going to get them into that state, and then how to be able to regulate regardless, you know? Sure.
Have you guys ever worked with someone who didn't realize that they might have been traumatized at some point in their lives?
Oh, of course.
For sure.
Yes. And one of the ways I try to identify is because people don't always recognize an event. And I'll ask, who happened to you? And you usually identify a person.
Okay, that is really good.
Right. And and then getting them to look at, this is who happened to you. Or I'll ask, because I think it was you, Cherish, where you were talking about the behaviors or people doing things, and I will ask, what do you get from that? It's not beneficial to you. It's like a crackhead. They know, or I've seen some people who smoke cigarettes. I hate it. I can't stand it. And they're still puffing.
Right.
They're getting something from it. And we can explain that so much easier because we think that's a physical addiction. But when it's something in your head and your heart, what are you getting from it? Well, I don't know. Well, who did you learn it from? Where did you learn it from? And because it's this learned behavior, it's like learning that slapping it's not okay. Let me say that. It's not okay. But what you've seen it so much, you've been conditioned to believe that that's nothing.
Yeah.
I agree, for sure. And I think when you're working with individuals who don't maybe recognize that they have experienced a trauma or are having symptoms of a trauma, that's one of the things as a therapist that I enjoy the most and am most passionate about. Not to say I love showing you that you're traumatized, but to say I love being able to help you make sense of it.
Yeah.
Because like you said, it's not for no reason. Whatever pattern you're stuck in these behaviors, let's figure out the origin of this so that we can now bridge the gap. And it's not just, oh, why am I like this? Why am I doing this? Well, let's find out, because it's something for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, I've worked with a few clients actually that very ambivalent. They come for one thing, I want to be my best self is the goal. It's very general. And then you start diving and digging. And then it's like, well, that person's actually having a reaction. And then you kind of put things in front of them, from what they share to help them to kind of see like, okay, how did that feel? And like, oh, I always wondered why I was experiencing this, and I just figured it was the same. Or I have someone who just kind of pointing it out, realizing this person is doing what happened to them to themselves.
That one is real.
Yeah. So it's like constant, and they're not even aware. They think they're doing the best, and they are doing the best they can, because it's very subconscious. It's not something that is in their conscious at that point because of conditioning of what has happened. And so when you kind of bring that and you point it out, they're like, no. And I always love the time when we come back a couple sessions after. So I was thinking.
The light bulb moment.
Right? Like, so remember when you said, yeah, okay, I agree now. So it's like, okay, just had you think about some things. And as they think about it, it's like, wow, it took them a minute to really digest that, to really recognize, like, I didn't know that infected me that much. Sometimes it's, the father not in the home, or what happened to the father or the parent or something like that. And they've said, hey, I'm okay, I'm good, but not recognizing no, that was a big issue,
Yeah.
for me. And that really has impacted me in a lot of ways. And I just normalized it.
Right.
Mhm.
That's just what it was, And so they never really realized
Mm-hmm.
that was the thing. So it's been very interesting kind of seeing different ways that people have been able to understand their trauma or communicate their trauma,
Yeah.
or what they label it as, because
True.
as Naaila said, everything isn't trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Some things, and there are people who have come and says, no, I'm straight trauma, and I have to say, okay, let's look at this a little bit, let's compare. You
Mhm.
tell me,
Yeah.
like, let me. So it's just that education, that constant education to help
Mhm.
someone
Yeah.
to have a better insight and understanding of things.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think a few things that I've seen, like for one, attachment styles, like how you mentioned earlier, and rationalizing, people pleasing. Those are not just because people are doing those things doesn't necessarily mean that they have been traumatized. But if they are repeating the same behavior over and over and over again, like people pleasing, trying to earn someone's love because they didn't get it as a kid,
Mm-hmm.
or rationalizing like, oh, well, maybe I'm thinking about this too much, or maybe, God has my back and, I love God, but we can't use him to rationalize the way that we feel instead of avoiding our feelings all the time.
For sure.
And I think that's a huge one that comes up. And once we get down to peeling back some of those layers of why are we constantly people pleasing? Why do we have such poor boundaries? Or why do we have such rigid boundaries? Sometimes it is the opposite. Usually there is an event that happened over and over again, or something that they didn't get from a parent, like the lack of support,
Mm-hmm.
or the lack of acknowledging emotions. And now they don't look at emotions at all.
Yeah.
Right. Oh yeah.
And continue to do that in their relationships and friendships. I think usually sometimes if I hear that, it's like, okay, I've heard that a few times. Like, where'd you get that from? And it kind of goes back to who hurt you or who happened to you.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something really important to look at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All behavior means something.
Mm-hmm. That's why psychoeducation is so important too. I feel like, excuse me, as therapists, we're not necessarily advising or solving the problems, but I do think that we have a responsibility sometimes to teach, because we do have an expertise and a knowledge base that people don't have.
Yeah.
People don't know, like you were saying, how trauma really manifests or how it can impact you every day, and what's literally happening in your brain and in your stress responses that keeps you on edge all the time. It's very real, and people don't always have access to that knowledge. So part of our role, I think, is to show that this is a very intentional and direct thing that's happening. It's not just these random symptoms that you're having, because people don't know how to put that together, and it's important.
Absolutely. I was going to say too, like, just because you've endured trauma, and I think that some people stay away from that trauma word, is because sometimes it can equate to broken. Something's wrong with me.
Sure.
I should be discarded.
Yep.
Right? I'm not worthy. I have no value. I'm less than. Those are the things that starts. I can't be trauma. No. That's for them other people. And they place it somewhere else, but that's not the case.
Yeah.
Just because you have experienced trauma and that's what it is, there's healing in that. There's the ability to heal from that, and take different steps. But that's something too that comes out as we speak, is just thinking like, people, I think, have a hard time conceptualizing something that they've gone through as trauma and reject it because of what's associated with it.
Yeah.
And some take it on like a badge of honor. That too, right? And that can become something where someone always is the victim. They become the victim. They wear that and they say, okay, hey, I'm the victim, and they have to have education as well to understand that it's not going to get the life that you truly deserve,
Right.
and want. So
Yeah, and just to go along with that, like I've had clients not tell it. Well, if they're telling me about a parent or a loved one or something, they're like, well, they weren't here for this moment in my life, but it's not that bad. They don't want the parent to sound bad. And it's just like, okay, let's validate your experiences. Like, this happened, right? This happened, or it didn't happen. They didn't give you what you needed at that time. It doesn't necessarily make them a bad parent.
Yep.
You know, it doesn't mean that you're a bad kid for saying, hey, parent, you did this to me.
Right.
But just acknowledging the fact that it happened. Your parents might not have validated your experiences, but here we need to validate that. That little version of yourself needs to be validated.
Yeah.
And it's okay if that happened to you and it doesn't necessarily label the parent as bad. It just saying that maybe they didn't have the capacity to handle something that happened in your childhood. So it's a lot to be explored there too. It's a lot to be explored there too. Are there any evidence-based interventions that you guys like to use when working with your clients?
Yes, for sure. I know that one that I have been certified in and like to use when I work with adolescents, but then families on a greater scale, is trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. What I like most about that modality is that it does include usually a youth that has experienced some trauma, but then also a parent or a caregiver, to where not only can we help the youth manage those symptoms, but we can also teach someone else in the family to help manage those symptoms and just what it looks like and what the meaning behind it is. And it starts it's kind of a gradual exposure, just type of modality. So first we're going to work on relaxation and how to control your affect and how to identify your triggers and things like that. And then moving in a little bit more towards, okay, let's process through the events that happened to you. Try to not ever rewrite the story, right? Because your story is your story, but kind of explore if the narrative can be shifted a little bit, the impact, the meaning, if that can be just placed in a little bit more rational or safe terms to be able to process it in a healthier way, for sure.
I use ACT, so it's acceptance commitment therapy, but there's a trauma focused portion that you can kind of apply. And what that is really it's educating and really asking, permission, like helping them to kind of say, hey, this is what we're going to go over. This is what we're going to do. But it's more sensitive to the person's story and what they've been through. The value I see in ACT is that it's values driven. It has mindfulness in it. And what I see the most that's beneficial is when someone has experienced trauma, and I talked about it earlier, is like it's this disruption of safety and then the loss of control. When we clarify your values, there's a sense of control that's achieved because I'm learning who I am outside of what I experienced. And so I love it because it's practical and it gives someone something to hold on to say, hey, this is what matters to me. This is what's important to me. And I didn't lose that. I just needed it clarified. And when we can do that, you see that you're not what you went through.
Yeah.
Right. And then you gain a better understanding. The hard part is the acceptance piece. I got to accept it. That's the tough piece. But when I get to a place and I help someone clarify what they value and what's important to them, it's easier for them to make choices and decisions, even in the past, to close the door on some things because I have something to look forward to because now I have some control back.
Yeah. I think it's important to have that separation sometimes because, like you said, so many people define themselves with these things that have happened to them or that they've been through. And what happened to you is not who you are and what you are. But because it's so easy to internalize these heavy negative things, I think it's important to kind of be able to take a step back from that and have some separation between the event and what I'm trying to get to now.
Yeah, absolutely.
With ACT, the whole acceptance versus avoidance piece, I try to harp on that a lot. I let my clients know it's like you're trying to hold a ball like a floaty underwater, and you're trying to keep this thing underwater as much as possible because you don't want it to pop up. These are your emotions, the uncomfortableness of it all, and the moment you let that ball go, it's going to pop back out of the water. There's going to be emotions that keep coming up and keep coming up. These emotions are your check engine light. It's letting you know, hey, something is going on and we need to see what it is. Instead of trying to avoid the feeling because this is what's holding you back and keeping you in that victim mindset. Let's work through these feelings. Let's process some of them. Let's see what's going on. Just accept the fact that it's there. That is usually the hard part,
Yeah.
is accepting the fact that it's there, and the memories that come back with, okay, I'm feeling sad or depressed because of this, and this is something that they've been avoiding this whole time. So I definitely love ACT as well for working with my clients. That and observing your thoughts, because your inner dialogue is so important.
So all over the place sometimes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
It's so easy to beat ourselves down and blame ourselves and shame and guilt ourselves. But observing what you're saying to yourself and even challenging the fact if it's real, if it's, most of the time they're not, it's just a thought, it's not a fact.
Yeah.
Being able to observe that and notice it and change the language of what you're saying to yourself is really important.
Yeah, for sure.
And Naaila, you said you work with, or you're certified in EMDR.
Yes, I'm trained in EMDR. It's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And it's actually, just another form of neuroscience. I call it's cheap medication. It's medication without medication. So I'm going to use my arm here. And this is your brain stem. This part back here, where your amygdala is, your fight, flight, fawn, which is people pleasing, and your freeze when you're so afraid, it's so traumatic. There's those moments where you say, "Well, I didn't know what to say, I didn't know what to do." That would be freeze. And then you have up here your brain. Your brain is up here. But when trauma happens, I want you to think of, you have your emotions, your memory, and your logic. And they all live in this neighborhood in your brain. They've got their streets and, their stores and schools. It's nice village, everyone working together, living together, healthy place. But then an earthquake comes through. A tsunami comes through, and that's your trauma. And then what happens is that your emotions are on one side of the village, and logic and memory, they get stuck on the other side. So now there is a barricade. There is a block between the emotions and logic and memory. And then you keep emoting over this same tsunami, this same earthquake, this same flood, whatever it is, all over again. But what you don't know, because of the barricade, because what happens is that the brain, due to the trauma, it stops talking to itself. But when you use EMDR, you create a bridge to have them communicate again. And so you don't know that on the other side that logic and memory are good because they've rebuilt. They've had reconstruction. They've had revitalization. They've rebuilt the roads. But you don't know that.
Yeah. They're not talking.
Because they're not talking. Because you are barricaded. You're barricaded off. And so EMDR uses what we call bilateral sensations, and when we say eye movement, that's the first thing that people think of, using eye movement to move your eyes back and forth. And I'll talk about what that is in a second. And then there are also sound. You can buy these little things that make sounds, synchronized sounds for EMDR, and you can also use tapping. You can do it. I've used tapping a lot, especially through COVID.
Yeah.
Because I was trying to do EMDR virtually during COVID. And so you use the eye movement because during REM sleep, rapid eye movement, this is, how we get sick and people always say, well, you need some rest. You need to get some rest. You need some sleep. And you do, because this is when your body, including your brain, it heals itself. This is when your janitor comes in. And so you want to stimulate that part. But what you do is you attach the bilateral stimulation to an event. So with EMDR, we cannot go through your entire childhood.
Yeah.
We're going to have to go through something that happened on your 10th birthday. or something that happened that traumatized you with your mother or your father. You do it moment by moment, or a car accident.
Yeah.
You do it moment by we can only one I guess I'll call it EMDR treatment, one event or situation. And what you do is we knock down the barricade so that the emotions can see that your logic says you are safe now, you are not a threat to yourself, and no one is here to harm you,
Yeah.
that you are okay. And your memory says, I remember it. It did happen. However, I have moved past that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am at a different place. And even when I remember that, it does not mean logically that I am being harmed all over again. And when I feel those emotions, and as they may come up again, I can tell myself that I am safe. If I felt like I was powerless, I want to go from a place of powerless. Well, I feel like I can make my own decisions. And you go through several sessions of EMDR and to implant the belief that I am no longer powerless, that I can make my own decisions, or whatever it is that the person wants to insert on the other side. Because we can't change your history.
Right.
Who or what happened to you, it did occur. However, your body and your mind and your logic, they don't all have to be on separate parts of the same village anymore.
Yeah.
Y'all can go back and y'all can live.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I love that. I appreciate you saying that. And that's definitely a modality I'm interested in, and I love what you said. I think something that came to mind too when you were talking about the logical versus emotional, there's a DBT activity, which is, y'all, I almost said diabolical behavior therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT, a lot of emphasis on mindfulness and grounding, but there's an activity that I like to use called Wise Mind, which is kind of, finding that connection between the emotional side and the logical side, because both are valuable, both have something to offer, but what happens a lot of times is when we first experience something, whether that's the first experience of the event or even a memory or a distressing thought about an event, that emotional side is going to be the first one to pipe up every time.
Right.
And a lot of times it kind of shuts out the more logical and the ability to say, I am safe and I am okay, because we're just reacting off how it made us feel right now. So being able to bridge, like you said, bridge the gap and kind of get rid of that barricade between logical and emotional is where we operate at our wisest self and are able to manage that most effectively.
Because if you have too much logic, you messed up.
Mm-hmm.
If you have too much emotion, you've messed up.
Yeah.
You know, I think this is maybe also some of the ways men and women don't always
True.
balance themselves out.
True.
That the community standpoint, the metaphor that you use remind me when I was working with adolescents. They were in residential, and I would talk to them, and they would kind of. I had a couple that were really, they like to rehearse their trauma a lot, and so.
What do you mean by that?
Yep. So they like to always tell you what they've been through. So they'll always talk about their trauma, and it'd be the first thing that they say. So any connections is always their trauma. So I can't do something because I've, well, this would have been different if this didn't happen. So you get this rehearsal, right? And so I remember there was a kid in particular, love her to death. And I would be like, so when you gonna come out the trap? And she got a kick out of that. So she said, what? I said, the trauma trap. I said, you trauma trapping. She said, what? I said, you staying in a place that you don't like because you say all the time, but I think you are starting to like it because you won't step outside of it. And it probably is scary because if I'm used to something, then I'm okay in it because it's comfortable, even though it's not right, and not something that I like, but this is all that I know. However, it doesn't have to stay that way, right? So you can actually walk outside, or go to the other side, or use the bridge. Or I always say sometimes it it can be like somebody who's sitting in a prison, the door's been open and unlocked, but you sit there and just because you see the bars, you refuse to get up and open it and say you've been free for a minute.
Right.
But I'm just so used to being in here.
I'm going to say.
Yeah.
It's familiar.
It's
Mhm.
familiar.
And
Absolutely.
it's that self-sabotage piece, though, that
Absolutely.
happens sometimes because when you're so used to being sad or being disappointed or being angry, like you just start to sit in those in things that make you feel that way. You're not even trying anymore to kind of avoid those feelings because it's been your experience for so long.
And they require accountability.
True.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
That was my
Oh yeah.
point. Go ahead. I got something to say about it.
Oh yeah.
No, I'll just stay here. I like being sad because if I'm sad, I don't have to work towards happiness. I don't have to sustain anything. No one's going to expect anything
Yeah.
from me. I can stay raggedy right here.
Yep.
True.
Absolutely.
And because if I elevate at all, you might expect me to do that again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how do I do that again if I feel like this again?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the tricky part about trauma in general. And I hope this doesn't sound insensitive in any way, but regardless of what any individual goes through, life goes on. And that's what's so tough because then now we're playing this game of I have experienced this terrible blow and I feel so bad and negative and XYZ. How do I literally integrate back into this world that keeps on turning? I'm still expected to go to work. I'm still expected to, be a mother, a sister, a daughter, whoever it is. And it's hard because sometimes it is an easy way out to just not to not have to try to do that or to try to keep going even though everything else around you does.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think a big one, this one's a hard pill to swallow, but having to pay attention to your own hand in the trauma and staying in that trauma. Sometimes it's like it's easy to point the finger. This person did this person did this. And it's like, okay, yes, this person continually did this, but they probably did it because where are your boundaries? Like your boundaries are probably porous, and there's a reason why your boundaries are porous. Or if no one, like you don't have friends, or because your boundaries are rigid, you cut these people off. You kind of did that, and so it's kind of like you're still sitting in this trauma. Yes, this thing happened to you, again, but you don't have to stay stuck. There are other ways out of it, and sometimes acknowledging and holding yourself accountable for the things that might have contributed to the trauma. And I don't want to say it like, oh, this is your fault. It's just like, okay, this thing kept happening to me because I was a people pleaser. I need to understand why I'm a people pleaser.
Yeah.
That self-acknowledgement is a huge part. And a lot of times people don't want to do that because it feels like you're pointing the finger back at yourself. You're not necessarily, but you have to understand why. Like, why were you doing this over and over again? Why do you have bad relationships over and over again? There's a part that you have to understand about yourself.
Yeah.
And that is such a hard pill to swallow for
It
people.
is. I agree though. I think it's so important, and especially when you're in a pattern and when you feel like a situation is repeating, or like you said, maybe all of your friendships are failing, or you're not achieving what you want to achieve at work. A lot of times it is an accountability thing to where what could you be doing to maybe alter that a little bit? And it's never a blame thing, but I love to say to my clients, that's optional, actually. Or you allowing that is optional, or you doing this is optional, because it's not always about what the external forces are doing. A lot of times it's about what we allow to be in our space and our energy and our peace. So definitely have to have that accountability piece for sure.
I also think that a missing piece to that is we have to understand our participation. Like we have a part of what happens, it takes our participation or non-participation.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that people don't understand their own power in situations. And when you don't, then you don't. Right. And so when you are showing someone and helping them to see how much power they actually do have in a situation, it becomes hard because a part of that power is also acknowledging, right? But also seeing the harsh truth, right? there's truth in the fact that, wait, hold on, I do have and I did have a lot of power, but I didn't know I had that,
Right.
and then I didn't use it. Well, wait, I could have, because then it goes into prevention.
Yes.
I could have prevented this. Then it goes into, well, now I can't. And then sometimes it's real disruptive because now I can't blame,
Yes.
can't place blame start in a place that maybe I was able to, right? So I didn't have to take accountability. Now I have to look at myself and say, okay, hey, I could have done this. Now that's not to say certain things that do happen, you don't have control fully over, but there's still power that you do have, and the ability to participate in understanding what has taken place, what took place, and how to change feeling powerless by understanding the power that you do have, and making sure that those things don't happen again. Right. And that you equip yourself with the healing that's necessary and that's needed in order to be able to move forward. So you don't see that in yourself or in those that are connected to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, if people are coming to get care, what is trauma-informed care? If they see that somewhere on a profile, what does that mean, trauma-informed care?
The first thing that's coming to mind is person-centered for me, because it's so important. Like we said in the beginning, trauma impacts everyone on such a wide spectrum of levels. I think it's really important to have an approach that is very centered around the client's experiences and what would feel best for them in healing, what their better would look like, right? Everyone's better is not the same. I like to ask clients in the beginning of therapy, like, if there was a magic wand and a year from now, what would be different for you? What would feel different? What would you carry differently? And I think that that's the best way that we can be trauma informed, because it recognizes their experiences. It recognizes cultural factors that might be at play, anything that is, contributing to where this person is at today. That has to be person-centered for sure.
I think paying attention to the environment is also really important. Like maybe not having chairs that aren't facing the door. If it's maybe we can have it sitting open. Paying attention to the lighting in the room. Like if you are in an office that's in a, let's say, city center and it's loud, it's good to kind of pay attention to what might affect someone's hypervigilance if they hear loud noises, if they're jumpy, and kind of make some adjustments and work around that.
Definitely. I agree.
Any others for trauma-informed care?
I would say I love what you said about environment, because a lot of people don't think about that. In my work with adolescents and working in residentials, that was huge. Something, and just honestly putting more care into what we do in terms of practice. So it was always like, how would I want to be treated if I'm coming into something? I want the environment to look good. I want the smell. I want everything. I want to feel good. I want to encounter people that are warm, that are, not quickly all in your face. You get a moment, you get space, you get time, that kind of thing. And then you're asking more questions versus leading someone and asking them a whole bunch of questions. You're more so gathering information from them and kind of saying like, hey, what can I do for you? How can I help you feel more comfortable? I'm thinking of you first in a situation then versus what I need to get done. So that was something that was very, how do I help you feel safe? And that's always the first of my mind when I'm thinking about, trauma informed and person centered, is how do I get you, even in my sessions, right? My first thing is, how do I help you feel safe, right? So that you don't feel judged and you feel open to be able to express yourself in the way that you need to in that time. So it's always thinking of that other person first and being sensitive to their needs and triggers, possible potential triggers, and planning for that and understanding, planning to prevent that from happening.
I think another big one that I've seen in different agencies that I work for is remembering that behavior. All behavior means something. You don't know what the person's background is at first, but once you find out, if let's just say this person has been institutionalized and they're constantly, arguing with other clients or quick tempered and, making sure that we don't take that personally. they're not mad at you. They may be mad at this situation, but you can't take it personally. You have to sit and ask questions like, okay, well, what happened? What made you feel this way? And the more you talk to the person, you'll learn that, maybe they were going back to being institutionalized. Maybe they were in solitary confinement for a while. Maybe they had to always stay focused on protecting themselves. And I think that's something that's really important, that sometimes the ball gets dropped, and especially in agencies, because it's a lot going on with timing and paperwork and everything else. But that's something that we have to be cognizant of as clinicians, that this behavior isn't just because they're bad people. It's not because, they're just angry today. There's something else going on.
Yeah.
And we have to kind of dig a little deeper to figure that out.
Yeah.
That comes up too, especially with like children and adolescents, because, and we even we use language the correct way, but then are not conceptualizing it. Like, how many times have we seen a kid is acting out or talking too much in school, and everyone's like, "What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you?" What is really wrong? There is something wrong, right? It's not just, oh, he just came to school that day and decided to show out. It's there's always something underlying. And even to the sense of safety, sometimes that starts at like basic needs. You can't expect a kid to sit in a classroom for 7 hours if he ain't had breakfast that morning or dinner the night before, or couldn't sleep because there's conflict in his home. Like, all these things that contribute, I think it's really important to zoom out a little bit and see what are the factors at play right here, because a lot of times it's not just a defiant kid just for fun.
Yeah.
Well, then we can get into a space of re-triggering, right? So
100%.
if I'm not cognizant and I'm not paying attention, I'm not trauma informed, what happens is, if that kid is acting out in class and we're not taking into consideration the conflict that they experienced, or they didn't eat, or things like that, then I might be suspending that kid. I might be doing things that are detrimental to that child, when school might be a safety place, a safe place for them, right?
Yeah.
So I might be actually taking that away from them, even in that case, right? So it's always looking at that aspect too. If indirectly we tend to re-traumatize people in our practices when we're not looking at things from a trauma-informed lens.
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to see the forest through the trees. You can't just look at what's in front of you. There's always a bigger picture. And even with adults, they can be re-traumatized as well, taking things away from them. Like, this is going back to agency work. And it could be something as small as like denying a privilege, and it's somebody else taking something else away from them again. Like, that might be how they're looking at it. So just taking a slow down, slow down and look at the big picture and all of it. Because again, I say it all the time: behavior means something. What is the importance of being culturally competent in practice?
I chuckle when you say that, because when all of you were talking just then, I was thinking about how important it is when you say re-traumatizing someone, to understand the culture, so I could know that perhaps might not be a trauma. I just know that that's not something that is customary within my natural circle, or because you are of a different culture that has a subset of harms and abuses that are not in my world, to be aware of it so that I can ask about it.
Yes.
Because I don't know. But if I don't even know that it exists,
right.
how? And I'll give you an example: female circumcision that came up for me with a couple of clients. If I did not know if you are from a certain area, and that could be the custom at a certain age, I may not know to ask or inquire about the impact of that, the trauma of it, and the whole event that into how they deceived her and told her she was going to a birthday party. And she ended up having female circumcision.
Wow.
And so going through all of...
That's crazy. Birthday parties. Wow.
Yes. So, and then learning that could potentially be a part of someone's culture. And if she is 12 years old and she's pubescent, and I'm seeing some things, might have something to do with that.
Yeah.
So being culturally aware of the experience that your client may have that really may not be your framework at all.
For sure.
I something that this happened. It wasn't my client, but this young lady, she had been put in the mental institution for a 72-hour hold. And I'm gonna do a hand gesture, and y'all are probably gonna know what it is. I'm gonna trust that you do. But someone tried to say that she was engaging in some type of self-harm.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. Okay.
Not self-harm.
That's not self-harm.
Little scratchy scratch.
Yeah, she's scratching her weave.
Yeah.
But it got documented
Wow.
as self-harm.
That is a good.
But someone else on the floor who knew what that was, like, you mean this? I do that.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
And this is where being culturally competent, and I think I'm going to use culturally competent and culturally sensitive in two different ways.
Yeah.
Because you can be aware, but you don't care.
Yeah. That's
Because you have decided that your culture is the dominant, the prevalent, and the necessary one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when you show sensitivity, ask a question,
Ask a question.
be curious. But if I don't know to ask someone what this means, if you don't know, if that never crosses your mind, I can't say necessarily that you are being insensitive, but you are definitely unaware.
Yeah.
Right. And it takes a level of, transparency, maybe even vulnerability, but to that we're responsible for as clinicians to ask or to say, let me check in with my implicit bias, make sure that I'm not making any assumptions, and be okay with admitting, I don't know what you got going on. Tell me a little bit more about that. Yeah. That's not something I'm familiar with. Can you share a little bit more so I can be educated on your experiences? And I think that not enough people are comfortable with putting themselves in a position to say, I don't understand that. We all come from such different backgrounds and cultural experiences. It's very necessary to be able to say, what is it that your experience was so that I can best support you? For sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That kind of brings up the next question of how can you balance empathy and boundaries when working with trauma clients, especially if the person that you're working with might be of the same race or same gender. How do you put your boundaries in place and also still be empathetic with the client?
When you say boundaries in place, you mean the professional boundaries?
And even emotional, maybe. I would say, working the population that I worked with, kind of immediately starting in this field, very, very high levels of chronic and complex trauma. And I guess by that, I just mean we're not talking about one traumatic event. This is like a lifetime or early childhood of just trauma after trauma after trauma. And it can be hard and it can feel very heavy because there are days that I just dang, life did not give you a break. Yeah. It's hard, for real. But I think that me being able to recognize my role in this therapeutic relationship, I don't have to carry this trauma. You're already carrying it, and I want to help enlightening that load for you. Has been something that I've had to tell myself a few times, just with the heaviness that can come with working with traumatized youth and traumatized adults, for sure.
Yeah.
I know that I'm not here to save the world.
Yeah, that's important to remember.
I am here to try to transform lives within my professional world, but I am not here to save the world. And so the world that I'm trying to work with collectively, it's small, even if you have a caseload of, 20, 25. It's small, and that's my focus. And while I'm in front of someone, as you said, it's not mine to carry, but I'm a facilitator. I facilitate the process. I don't take it on. Right. I actually came into this room with my own stuff.
Absolutely.
And I'm trying to categorize it and keep it in order, but knowing that it is not my role in this relationship for me to take that on.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Yeah, I think for me, saying that you come in with your own stuff, right? Um, Having to separate. Sometimes if I knowing like there's a marginalized group in my office, like if it's a black man, sometimes I might be super sensitive to see what's going on. And it's been times before where I've given that person way more time than I probably should have, and it took a toll on me.
Mm.
Even checking checking for myself for transference and stuff. And when I'm being triggered, whether it's a woman, a black woman, or any other race of woman, um, there's so many different things. Like with being a mom, and I have to check myself.
Mm.
And if I notice that I am being triggered and I'm crossing my own boundaries or giving more time or what have you, I have to go and at least go talk to my supervisor about it. Because this is something that came up for me that I probably didn't realize was still, would come up so strong when I heard this story.
Mm. For sure.
I would say it's always, especially like a lot. What I have found oftentimes is when you work with people, I've worked with people that I've had many experiences very familiar with what
Mhm.
they have experienced. So I always try to look at it from a standpoint of how do I utilize all of my experiences in terms of the expertise to be able to help guide them in their situation? Not for me to necessarily tell them, give them a solution, tell them about my story or what I'm bringing. No, no, no. But to one, if I'm a person who didn't feel heard, then I need to be the person that's listening.
Mm. True.
If I ever experienced a professional or had a poor experience when I went to help, then I need to make sure that person has an amazing experience with
Mhm.
help,
Mhm.
right? So I try to look at it and balance it from that aspect of saying, if I'm a person that is hurting or just confused or needs more clarity or whatever the case may be, whatever you're coming to seek support for, how do I leverage to make sure that you're getting everything that you came in the door for?
Right.
Right. And I try to consider the fact that although I may not have the same experience, I have been in various experiences that are familiar, and I would always want someone to make sure and consider the experiences I've had and be sensitive to those. But also being able to help, like in terms of the boundaries, right? I can't tell you how many clients have just thanked me to say, you know what, I appreciate that, having a boundary of showing up, like, hey, you have goals and, session is this time that you got to be responsible for showing up. You got to respond because how do we get you better?
Yeah.
You know, so it's even those things like I can't try harder than you do, but then also being empathetic that everyone learns at their own pace, everyone heals at their own pace. Everyone is ready for different things when they ready for it.
Right.
But I've always looked at it as I'm a seed planter.
Mm.
That has always resonated with me. It's just like I may be the person who is planting the seed. I may be the person who provides the sunlight. I might be the person who fertilizes it. But I play a role and I just need to play that role. That's
Right.
it.
Yeah.
It's good.
Since we're kind of talking about like the social part of it, with what is the impact of intergenerational trauma or systemic trauma, and how can it be addressed?
Mm.
No, that's a big one.
It is, but it's one that I'm very passionate about. Generational stuff is big for me.
Mm.
Um, I think I alluded to it earlier, which is there's healing no matter what you have experienced, and what has happened to you. And it's your responsibility to work through and work on healing that because that heals the generations after. You can stop a cycle if you understand the power in your ability to heal from heal in, however, heal out of situations and circumstances, and understand them for what they are, and giving opportunities to those after you or those alongside you. Because I say a lot of times it's how someone lives their life, even, is a demonstration of someone being inspired to change theirs. Like, truly, that influence and that ability to stand healed heals folks that just come across your path.
Yeah.
Because just seeing that is just like, and then you don't know what someone's been through. They don't have to know what you've been through, but if you heal from it, that's infectious, right? So I think that's something that I always try to encourage and kind of keep at the forefront of people who are very taking that courageous step and wanting to seek that assistance. And a lot of times I do see a lot of mothers coming in. I don't want this. I don't want to keep carrying this for my children. See a lot of mothers who struggle with that.
I agree. I think the generational piece is so significant, and also comes with challenges. I had a client teenage client, and we were doing family therapy with her legal guardians who were her grandparents. So there's 2 generations removed, and it almost goes back to the cultural piece of having that knowledge of where some of these barriers are going to be, providing a little bit of education, because it is so intertwined and affects so much, but it's a hard thing to navigate. And then systemic, I feel like that's something I'm so passionate about, and I've like worked with all these systems that are put in place to help these families and help these youth, and they're just very flawed systems. And a lot of times, a lot of that re-traumatization that we talk about, I mean, I'm thinking specifically, I guess, of just children at different levels of foster care and needing to be in different placements, and we're snatching them out of one place and putting them into another place, and, all of these things that, or even when you have a mother who's struggling to provide and care for her children, maybe she's having financial difficulties, and what's the state going to do? Take the kid, give them somewhere else, give this person money to help the kid. Why couldn't we support the mother and being, things like that, where it's just a larger systemic issue that causes a lot of generational trauma for the kids themselves, for the parents that are feeling like they're not enough, for the future generations. It's really, there's some important work to be done on the macro side of things, for sure. For sure.
Now, I've seen a lot of intergenerational with the mother-daughter, mother-child relationship, and maybe because the systems hold mothers more accountable sometimes. But for example, that mother that you're talking about who, for whatever reason, a child goes into custody. And then 5 years later, for whatever reason, she still hasn't regained custody, but then she has 2, 3, 4 more children.
Yeah.
And the same thing happens to all of her children. There's a pattern. There's a pattern here. And, something, I'm going to give this a example of a young lady I was working with whose mother was a victim of domestic violence for 16 years. And she was struggling in the relationship that she herself was in. And I asked her, what did you learn from your mother's years of abuse, physical abuse, verbal abuse? She said, she taught me how to leave. I said, she did leave. She left one time and she didn't go back. But she took 16 years to teach you how to stay. Which lesson did she give you repeatedly? Repeatedly. Now, she did do the decision that took her to, and you, to recovery. But for 16 years, you got rehearsal and show after show about how to live in an abusive relationship. And you're wondering why you're so successful at doing it now. So sometimes we of course you want to focus on your mother's victory. Yes. But what did you learn from 16 years of her lifestyle?
From the journey.
We have to look at both ends of those journeys.
For sure.
Has anyone ever done a genogram?
Yes.
I haven't.
No.
Yes.
That's the one with with the relationships, right? Like here's you and here's everybody in the lines
Like a
and stuff.
family tree?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you do the cross out,
Mm-hmm.
solid
Is it a
line.
positive relationship? Is it negative?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
What's your experience with them?
I mean, when you can take your relationships and use, lines and dashes and some form of creativity, and you can actually see where my weakest links are, who
Yeah.
pours into me and who does not. There may be several people in my life or in my circle, but everyone doesn't pour into me. And do they pour into me in ways that I believe that are helpful?
Yeah.
Mm.
I think it's a good tool for us as a clinician because it really does lay out from the client's perspective how each relationship is impacting them, and I think it can be really helpful for us to then be able to say, okay, so from your perspective, this is how things are with mom, this is how things are with friends. I think it's a good tool for us to be able to put a cohesive kind of picture together of what the client goes through.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, see, I do something different. I do these circles. You have
What they
like
look like.
inner circle, which is you. This
Isn't that the
hour is that what it is?
ecogram? You're right. The genogram, the eco.
Oh, well, see, I didn't know the formulation, but I used to say who's in your closest circle in terms of trust and things of that nature. And then what I would do is I always ask them, after a few sessions, you got to go back and who would you change?
Yeah.
And because after a moment, once you reevaluate all these people, because then I have you do some work with each individual that's in these little circles. Because I'm usually hearing a complaint or something happen, a pattern that's happening, right? So I'm getting them to see, to look at it and to break some stuff down and go back and they're like, but if I take these people, I don't have anybody in that circle. And that's the hardest part for them, right? And so it's like, wait a minute, what do I gotta hold on to somebody? No, so it's really helping them to see things. And so I've allowed this into my circle, or I've allowed this is why I continue to have this frustration or whatever is happening. But I use the circles just because they really are able to see who's closest to them. But I have to try the genogram. Okay.
It sounds similar, but the genogram will tell you about the quality of the relationships too.
Yeah.
And you'll get to see, because you do your relationship with your parents, and then your parents' relationships with their parents, and their siblings, and you can see the broken connection.
Now, what about the client that doesn't have that information?
That's tricky too. Then that genogram's not.
Yeah, we've been with that. Let's not do the genogram. We're going to re-traumatize.
No, it's true. That's real though, because I think another symptom of trauma that we haven't spoken about as much is loneliness. And people, whether it's actualized or perceived, we can feel really alone in our trauma. And a lot of times people really are alone. People can't identify, these 3 people are my natural supports or the people that I feel safe with. Some people don't have any, and that's an important thing to be aware of as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So even with asking that question, how do you choose which intervention to use with your clients? Like which one is going to be best, because there is no one size fits all.
I believe clients will let you know who they are and what they're responsive to. That everyone may not be responsive to meditation or visual imagery. So, ACT may not work for them. The idea of putting your problem on a leaf and visualize it moving down the stream.
I can't tell you how many teenagers I've been said something about deep breathing. They're looking at me like, girl, if you don't get that deep breathing out my face, that's not going to work.
Right. Or the idea that all meditation is the same. Yeah, I can't sit here and not focus. I'm going to teach you one where you don't have to focus. Transcendental meditation. Where you're not trying to shut your brain off, because guess what? You can't.
Yeah.
So understanding that different people respond to different things. If you like music, we're going to find a way to incorporate music. If you draw, I'm going to find a way to incorporate drawing, whatever it is. If I know that you cook, I am going to, I love to eat. So we're going to be able to talk about that and bring it into it, and regarding your relationship recipe. But you just have to figure out what people can resonate with, because everyone does not do deep breathing.
No, they do not. No, they do not.
All right. Yep. Yep.
For sure.
I agree. I think it's the questions. A lot of times I'm asking questions early on, especially if they've experienced therapy before. What worked? What
Didn't work.
what didn't? Right? Tell me.
Mhm.
Let me know. I don't want to do those same things, right? Either. But then sometimes I also find myself where we'll talk, and if they have not had a great experience, sometimes it's also trying to see like, how about we try it? Because
Yeah.
sometimes it may have not been well, been something that and I have had some clients where they were like against journaling, but like, this is the best. Like, because then you're giving them prompts, or you're helping them out a little bit.
Yeah.
So it's usually, sometimes it's like getting a feel for, I love what you said. It's like, what do they like? Like, asking them questions about themselves, and then you kind of gathering that information to be able to leverage what modality, what intervention is
Mhm.
going to be the best for this person, and what they may. And if it doesn't, I always say like, hey, let me know. So I'm always asking for feedback at the end, is like, what worked well and what didn't. And so if it did not resonate with you, we can throw it out, because we're building your toolbox, right?
Right.
We're building things that you can use. And if they don't, that's okay.
Definitely a little element of trial and error sometimes, which is
Yeah.
okay, for sure.
Yeah, and be okay with not sticking to just one thing. Like EMDR is great. That may not be great for everybody. ACT is great. It may not be great for everybody, but not being so tied to this one intervention because it works for a lot of people. Being sensitive to the client as well.
Yes.
Meeting them where they're at. Like
Mhm.
when I worked in group homes, I learned that you can't just go tell a kid to go take a shower, because
That might be traumatic.
yeah,
Yeah.
you can't just say, okay, wear this to bed. That's fine. They may not feel comfortable in that. And there's a lot to be said about just meeting people where they're at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Being okay with that, keeping an open mind as a clinician.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Um, well, we kind of answered that one. How can family and friends best support someone who's been traumatized?
The first thing I can think of is to ask, how can I help you?
What do you need from me?
Yes, what is my role in this moment? And it very well may be that the person doesn't know. I have no idea how you can help me. But what you can do is be present. It might also mean shutting up, being quiet.
Yes.
Because we all know that people say very well-intentioned things that end up harming someone.
Right.
So just be present in that moment. You know what? I may say in the session, okay, I see you're tearful. I'm just going to be here with you right now, and you let me know when you're ready.
Yeah,
For sure.
absolutely.
So don't assume that you know what it is that they need.
Yeah.
Ask them. And if they can't say, there are always some basic things that someone can use. If it's a mom, well, just go get some snacks for her children.
Yeah.
Find a way to, and this is for family and friends. I'm not saying, as us as professionals, because we do have to look at ethics. But for family and friends, find a way, because typically what we say is, well, just give me a call if you need anything. And people can want to be resilient. They don't want to be seen as weak, and they don't ask for assistance, or I don't know what to ask for. But there are basic things that I can do for you. Can I pick the kids up? Can I take them to the park for a couple of hours so you can get some rest? I may not act, and sure. Yes.
Yeah.
I would love that. And I didn't have to ask for it.
Right. I think that's a tool that we could use as professionals, but also when it comes to family and friends, or supporting other family and friends in helping. I think that I like what you said about, just making an action step. I think another kind of step in between, instead of asking these big open-ended questions of like, what do you need, that requires this thought out answer, ask a yes or no question. Does it feel good if I sit here with you right now? Do you want me to get out your face right now? Where it's just a very clear, like, this would either feel helpful or harmful in the moment, and not require so much thought. When people are upset, a lot of times, like we talked about, the logical side is not coming in strong in that moment. So just making it a little easier for them to identify what would feel helpful. For sure.
I think also it's really important, just going back on the client side of things, to help them communicate what they need. Because a lot of times, again, a lot of times we won't know exactly what we need. But I tell some of the clients that I work with, like when you go home, you can't assume that people are just going to know. So you have to be vocal about it. Let's kind of line out what this looks like when you go home. How do you want people to like talk to you? How do you want the space to be? What do you need help with? What is a challenge for you? And just kind of teaching them how to say, hey, this is, as far as recovery goes anyway, this is something that I need to help me in my recovery, to help me get past this little moment in my life. Sometimes I might need you to just be a listening ear, and we don't necessarily say that all the time either. We just go to talking, and then when we get advice, we get upset.
Yep.
We can't go and assume. So just teaching the client also how to explain or how to communicate what their needs even are, or what support even looks like, is important as well.
Right.
As far as professional growth and reflection, what challenges do we face as clinicians when we are working with clients?
Generally speaking, trauma speaking, just in general, or clients that experience high levels of trauma?
With clients who are experiencing,
I think we touched on a little bit earlier too, but just the need that some clinicians feel to fix the problem or save the world, as you mentioned earlier, and understanding, having a very initial recognition that that is not, should not be the goal, but being able to be okay with that and say, what is needed, what is my role. It can be tough because a lot of the things that we see our clients go through, and we are empathetic, and it can feel so unfair, and I just wish they didn't have to go through that, and we have to have that acceptance piece ourselves and be able to support them in accepting as well, and healing, for sure.
When you earlier when you were talking about empathy and boundaries, to also understand that in a moment with the client that you can be human. That yes, you may get tearful yourself. However, do not allow yourself to get to the point where, this is why clinical supervision is so important, to the point where you are in a worse position than the client is because of their trauma, because you cannot self-manage yourself, because you may have been triggered.
Right.
You may not have expected or been professionally prepared for what it is that you just heard, but to be competent enough about yourself professionally, emotionally, and mentally, that when someone does say something that does knock you off your own square, that you can get through the moment.
Right.
If you need to cry after they go, cry after the session.
Yeah.
Do what you need to do. Call your supervisor, call your own therapist, but don't break down. And then it shifts the focus.
Yeah.
And a client will be gladly transition and deflect and allow you to be the client in that moment and not work on themselves.
Yeah. I think for me is finding balance, being a helper and providing a service, like therapy, and kind of just being the helping profession is just making sure that I'm taking time for self and doing that check-in and making sure that I have my boundaries and refreshing those. Just being a parent and helping other people can drain you, and just kind of checking my energy level. Like, can I give it today? And sometimes, you kind of get used to being able to take on the world, but then you have to say, okay, wait, hold up. I need a timeout, or I don't have it, and I need to take a break. I need a PTO, I think that's some of the balance too, is that we want to help and we want to give and we want to help other people and see those changes and that transformation and get excited about it. It does re-energize you, but you are still human, and the stories and someone helping someone process I might not take on your trauma, but it took energy.
Yeah.
And I have to find things that give me back that
Right.
energy
Mhm.
and help increase my energy so that I can give more. So I think that's something too, of just learning how to keep balance.
Yes.
And not getting to the point where you're like drained and then trying to pour that balance in, but keeping
Yeah.
it balanced pretty much at all times.
Yeah. I think for me, I run on autopilot so much.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just going until I'm gone.
Yeah.
And it's just being able to check in with myself and seeing, where can I dial it back some?
Yeah.
I think as therapists, people know that we're therapists, and sometimes they call and we mentioned this in the last episode. Just people requiring a lot of you,
Yeah.
and recognizing that this job also requires a lot of you. And you do have to find that balance, because if you don't, you will have a moment.
Yeah.
And it could be a breakdown moment. So, I think in the last one, I also mentioned like that window of tolerance, paying attention to when you're outside of that window,
Yep.
paying attention how does your body respond to stress? For me, I shut down. If I notice that I'm scattered, I'm all over the place, I'm not emotionally present. If I'm like extremely tired and I've actually had some sleep, I might need to step back. And sometimes with trauma, we're dealing with clients that have some trauma, or just in this field, period, you don't pay attention to self because you need to be there for other people. And that's being in that helpful field. And it's good to be aware of that. So I appreciate you said about balance.
Yeah, for sure. I agree.
Is there anything that gives you guys hope in the evolving field of trauma-informed mental care?
I would say just the overall decrease in stigma around trauma and mental health as of lately. I think we slightly touched on this last episode too. And again, we still have a long way to go. But the fact that there are generations and populations and communities that are now taking mental health a little more seriously, I think gives me a little bit of optimism that we're moving in the right direction.
Same. Absolutely.
I think the conversations are definitely helpful. This, right?
Yeah.
So helpful. The access and information that is available, I think makes me hopeful. It's just a matter of kind of what you said, is being careful at it being too much.
Yeah.
Right. And not seeing everything as trauma. And kind of understanding and really seeking a professional to be able to help you to understand if that it really is trauma. I think that brings me hope, because I do think that it shows a need for us, for our profession, and the value that it is as a therapist, as a counselor, as someone supporting someone through their journey in mental health. I think that makes me hopeful, because you can't replace that with AI. Okay. AI can't replace this job. So it makes me helpful, because people can Google all day, people can look in symptoms, and the information is helpful, but hopefully it triggers an action to say, let me talk to somebody. Let me see. So I think this is opening more conversations around trauma and early intervention. You're now seeing questions being asked in doctors' offices about ACEs and adverse experiences, is what ACEs is.
Last time I went to the doctor, they said, "Are you safe at home?" I was like, "Thank you for asking." I'm safe at home.
Yes.
So true.
So you're seeing practices get more, understand medicine, even understanding the value of asking questions early on to be more preventative. And then also that another thing allows opportunities for partnerships to continue to happen, so that then practices can partner with different places, communities can come together to offer services that's necessary, for clients that do have, concerns with different adverse experiences that they've had and need someone to talk to. So I'm hoping we'll see more connections happen in the field to make things more accessible to people that really do have a need. And then now that a lot of stuff, COVID really changed the game in regards to telehealth and being able to provide therapy from that that place, it allows deeper privacy. So it's like you
Right.
don't have to worry about somebody judging. Well, I got to go to the office and I got to go in. So I got to get the car. They're going to see me.
Yeah.
You know, I can do it out in my car. I can do it, you know, in my
Right.
office or, you know, my house or whatever, wherever I can, you know,
Right.
as long as I'm safe and stuff. So, yeah, I think that's what's making me hopeful about the fields and trauma and kind of seeing that more assistance there.
Yeah. Well, we are coming to an end with time. I know that we could go down a million different rabbit holes when it comes to trauma. Do you guys have any closing remarks that you want to mention?
No.
I really don't. I think it's such an important conversation, and I really enjoyed hearing everybody's insight and inputs for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a much needed conversation, and I valued listening to the various perspectives. This is important because trauma is a hot topic,
Yes.
you know, right now in different various communities, you know, and just knowing that, you know, help is available, support is there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, guys, our website is soulsolutionsccs.com. I think Instagram is it at soulsolutionsccs.com? .com, at soulsolutionsccs. Give us a check-in if you need some help with some trauma, if you know someone who's gone through some trauma, if you just want to understand more about trauma, we are here to kind of give support with that. I've enjoyed this conversation thoroughly, excuse me. But I think that is all.
Awesome.
all.
Thanks,
This is
ladies.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.